Hi, good morning. I'm going to paint a windowscape and share with you my process. I just pressed record on a camera that is just outside that is pointing to the same section of sky I'm looking at. And I'm going to share that with you so you can see what I'm doing here. But what I do when I paint windowscapes, I share these every week on Instagram Live, just about every week, is I write down the weather data, record some basics, and then I get into painting the sky as I see it. Not being too precise, but trying to give a really good idea of what's happening as I see it, not an interpretation in terms of artistic, not an artistic feel, but more of a realistic, how do I represent what I'm seeing as accurately as I can within a small period of time. So let's start with the weather data. Today is April 26th. 2024. It is 11:36 a.m. 65 degrees. Winds 14 miles an hour from the west-northwest. And conditions, I have about 50% cloud cover right now. Those clouds are moving quickly. And I am facing south. So what you saw me do ahead of time was I put a little bit of water in some of my colors here. By the way, you might hear some yard work going on with a neighbor a few doors down. So if you hear mowers and blowers, I apologize. I'm going to try to keep this area free for the sky itself. All right, let's begin. I like to start by wetting my paints and my paper too. I find that when I'm painting skies, also when I'm painting water in general, which I've recently begun, but when I paint skies, starting with wet paper that can handle a lot of water is a good way to make sure that clouds and edges and just blue gradiates very well. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking a layer of water, and how wet I make it is really based off of what I'm trying to achieve. So I'm looking to see how the light bounces off of these wet spots. And I'm also sometimes going to try to actually take a little bit of that water off so it's not too wet. You'll find a balance over time. If you've painted for a while, you probably already know this. If not, if you're new to painting, first of all, lucky you. It's a really fun thing. But you'll also develop a feel over time. You just have to put in those brush hours. There's pencil miles and there's brush hours. So, okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm looking up at the sky itself. I'm looking first at, like, if we were to look at this as layers, what's the bottommost layer? And the bottommost layer is that blue sky. And that blue sky isn't just one color blue. It fades down as we go. I'm looking at where is I can't actually see the sun, but I can see the effects of the sun. So I'm looking at what points or what parts of the clouds are bright white, what parts of the clouds have shadow. It tells you what time of day it is. If it's in the morning, the shadows will be on the top, and the brighter points will be on the bottoms of the clouds. So we're looking at that. And we're also going to determine kind of like what are any kind of like warm colors, cool colors in the clouds. So these are the first things I'm thinking about, kind of behind the scenes as I'm approaching something like this. But let's start with that first layer, which is the blue. I'm going to use some Cobalt, and I'm going to make the gradient blend into a little bit of Cerulean mixed with Manganese. And I'm using this little tin right here to help stage that. And as I put this on right here, I'm going to go a little bit darker, more saturated than it actually looks, simply because when this dries, it is going to dry about 20 to 30% lighter. Now, as I was mentioning, we don't want this to be one big sheet of the same blue. And we're going to clean this up and go back and make it a more uniform gradient in a moment. But I'm going to strategically begin taking some of this paint off and wiping it on this wrist sock so that we get those lighter sections. Now down here, of course, you see there are little white clouds. We're going to put those in soon. But for right now, we're going to focus on the actual sky behind those clouds, because painting that sky in around those clouds would make it look a lot more disjointed. So we're coming in, working on that light blue. We're going to add a little bit more, in this case, cobalt. Now it's different for where you are. Blues are different in different parts of the world when you look at your sky. So you might have a blue that tints more towards green, or a blue that tints more towards red. And I think what's really great about this practice is learning kind of how your own everyday sky tints and what to expect, and watching that change over time. Okay, so now that we have these blues in, and we've gone just saturated enough so that we can let that, once that is drying, that will be truer to what we see. We're going to start working on our clouds. And to do this for today, since we have these big puffy clouds, we're going to focus on using Kleenex tissue to blot out some clouds and then put some details in with a smaller brush, maybe even one of these bigger brushes right here. So I'm going to get a tissue like this, and part of what I'm going to do is shape this tissue. Either I can tightly twist it, which I do for tighter cloud formations like this. When I do this, this allows me to get certain details, but we're seeing bigger, fluffy, puffy clouds. So we're actually going to make the tissue be kind of like this little puff mass. Now, these clouds are going to move and shift with this wind, this 14-mile-an-hour wind, as we're doing this. But we're just trying to get the feel, the gestalt. What are we kind of seeing here? Let's get this as close to what we're seeing as possible, but without spending so much time stressing out about it. Okay, so I'm pressing at varying pressures based off of what I'm trying to achieve here. I do want to show that there's this bottom layer that's a bit darker. And so I'm going to paint in those darker grays momentarily. Now where I'm looking and where the camera are pointed are about the same, but they're not spot on the same. So I'm kind of craning my neck to try to get exactly what is recording just outside, but it might not work out that way. But you'll still have an idea, I think, as to this is pretty close to the frame I'm actually looking at live here through my window. Okay, one more little spot right here. And then now I'm going to start to sculpt in these details. So we have the main cloud patterns. We have the blue behind it. We don't have as white of a cloud as we might have been able to get had we left certain sections completely white. And we could have done that as well. I'm going to use clean water for this. But the idea really is I'm also focusing on not an exact replica, a close representation, and with a limited amount of time. Because as I mentioned, I like to try to do these quickly. I do these in the morning. It's one of the first things I do. And I have, just like everybody else, lots of stuff on my plate. So I don't really feel like I can go deep into the weeds and spend an hour on a sky each day. But I can spend 5 to 10 minutes on a sky each day. So that makes this really doable. But to do that, that's where I have some trade-offs. And that is that sometimes I don't leave something pure white because it would just add a lot more time to do the painting around. I'm taking an eradicator brush, and this has some water in it, some clean water, and I'm trying to bring back some of those whiter spots before I put in the shadows. I'm going to do this up here. I'm also going to take a little smidge right here. And now I'm going to mix some gray. And that gray that I'm seeing, to me at least, is registering as a cool gray. So for that cool gray, I'm also seeing sections that are almost like if you were to look in terms of paint, they seem a little granulated. So for that, I'm going to take a little bit of Indanthrone blue, and I'm going to take a little bit of neutral tint. Now these are both really strong colors, and if you can see here, they're coming out pretty dark. So I'm going to wipe some of that off in the water pot. And I'm trying to get the right consistency and then the right amount of dryness on my brush. Now this brush might be actually a little too small. I think I'm going to go back to my big brush. Make a little bit more of that blend here. And I'm going to start to come in, and I'm pushing the brush on its side, kind of wiggling as I go. And now I'm building up those shadow shapes. Now this isn't always the way that I paint shadows. I paint them based off of how I'm seeing them in that day, but each day, you know, we have a different sky, and there's a lot of overlap sometimes in how things look, like with blue days. But with clouds, I really just find, you know, you find certain techniques that work well for certain types of formations, and you revisit them when relevant, but not as like a default, because then you would just be painting the same kind of thing each day. And this exercise is about painting what you're seeing right now. So right now I'm seeing these deeper clouds, these shadows on the bottoms of the clouds, and kind of this rolling with white down here. So I'm going to create a little bit more of that shadowy mix, go a little bit darker actually. And I'm going to work this in now, this way as well. And that's giving that contrast there. As I mentioned earlier, you'll notice when you're painting the sky, especially if it's a cloudy sky on a really windy day, that what you're painting is going to change. So if you were to look back and see, what did it look like at the very beginning when we first started painting this at 11:36 a.m. Right now it's 11:48, so 12 minutes. It's going to be a very different sky. All right, we're almost there. So now we're going to do a little bit more of the final kind of darker bottoms here. And I'm working off of this still being a bit wet so that it blooms up. I'm going a little bit darker than it looks so that it dries about the right color. And now I'm kind of double checking. I'm saying, okay, do I have the colors in? Do I have the feel of it in? Do I have the right kind of effect for what I'm seeing in the clouds here? And also, if I keep going, am I actually going to damage it? Because there's a point where you just have to stop. And that's where right now I feel like I have the effect baked in, and that any further adjusting is going to be unnecessary tweaking that might actually damage what we're seeing. So this tells me stop. When I get to that point where I'm feeling like I'm just looking for something to add, then I need to stop. It's done. So go ahead and clean the brush. And we're going to go ahead and unmask. Now, normally I would wait to unmask something like this until later, but when I do my live shares, I like to unmask them in the moment whenever it's possible, because I think it's neat to be able to show you what we were just working on and how that looks without all the tape on it. When I take off the tape that holds this down to the board, there's usually some paint water and paint on the sides. I like to wipe that off first because look at that. We wouldn't want that to get on the actual nice white section once we peel that off. All right, we're going to keep this part that has our weather data and we'll write it in a moment. Let's just very carefully peel this tape off, part one. Part two. Reminds me of that Tootsie Pop owl. A 1, a 2, a 3. Okay. There is our weather data. Now, I like to get a ruler and draw a little light line that I will soon erase. And then I write in these weather bits right under. Now be careful. I would let this dry first, but for this demonstration, I'm going to kind of go in wet. And I don't use a blow dryer for these ever. I've never taken a blow dryer to these. I'm going to gently draw this line like this. And let's write in what we had. So this was April 26th, 2024. It's 11:36 a.m. Well, it was 11:36 a.m. when we began. And at that moment, it was 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds 14 miles an hour west-northwest. 50% cloud cover. I like to put CC. And facing south here in California. Let us recap. And let's go ahead and erase that light line. Another recommendation is try to give this a little time too for the ink to dry before you erase. But again, for the sake of a demonstration and for your time, I'll go ahead and erase that now. For these, if I have a little piece of clean Kleenex handy, I take the eraser bits and I just gently go like this and scuff them off. And then I take the remaining bits with a little bit of tape I have left, do some housekeeping, put all these little handy dandy supplies back into the drawer, and there we have it. There's today's windowscape. So I do this every single day. I've done this for about 1.5 years now. I plan to continue this practice throughout 2024. I hope you'll join me and try it. And if you do try it, let me know how it goes. Let me know if you have any questions, what you've noticed, and if you have any hacks that I can apply here too. Take care. Thanks for joining me today.